The morning of February 18, 2003, started like any other for the residents of Daegu, South Korea. Commuters packed subway stations, rushing to work, school, and appointments. Life hummed with the familiar rhythm of a city on the move. But as the clock struck 9:53 a.m., the ordinary day unraveled into an unimaginable nightmare. A man named Kim Dae-han, armed with nothing more than 2 milk cartons filled with gasoline and a lighter, transformed the bustling subway into a raging inferno. By the time the flames were extinguished, 192 lives had been lost, over 150 were injured, and an entire nation was left grappling with horror and heartbreak. This is the story of a man consumed by rage and mental illness and the unfathomable destruction he unleashed in a moment of twisted despair. Kim Dae-han's life was unremarkable, defined by mediocrity and a series of personal failures. Born in the 1940s, he lived most of his life as an ordinary man. He held a string of low-paying jobs and maintained strained relationships with those around him. His demeanor was unassuming, his presence often overlooked. But behind the benign exterior was a man spiraling into darkness. In his later years, Kim's mental health deteriorated rapidly. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he experienced frequent delusions and paranoia, convinced the world was conspiring against him. Life's mounting disappointments, estrangement from his children, job instability, and social rejection fed his resentment toward society. He grew bitter and isolated, his thoughts consumed by a poisonous cocktail of despair and anger. Kim's feelings of alienation reached a breaking point in early 2003. He began to plan an act so devastating that it would force the world to take notice of his pain. The subway, with its confined space and daily crowds, became the perfect stage for his vengeance. Kim's decision to target the Daegu Metropolitan Subway was as calculated as it was horrifying. The subway system was a vital artery in the city's daily life, transporting thousands of people each day. Its design, narrow tunnels, crowded platforms, and enclosed train cars created an ideal environment for a fire to spread rapidly. Kim's intention was not merely to harm but to create an inescapable inferno. In the days leading up to the attack, Kim meticulously prepared. He obtained gasoline and stored it in 2 large milk cartons, aware that the flammable liquid would ignite and spread quickly in the enclosed environment of a subway car. His preparations reflected a chilling level of foresight, leaving little doubt about his intent to cause maximum devastation. On the morning of February 18th, Kim made his way to Junggangno Station, blending in with the throngs of commuters. He carried the cartons of gasoline concealed in plastic bags, his expression unremarkable. No one could have predicted the chaos he was about to unleash. At 9:53 a.m., train 1079 pulled into Junggangno Station, crowded with passengers. Kim boarded the train, positioning himself in the middle of the third car. As the train doors closed and the subway car began to move, Kim set his plan into motion. He poured the gasoline onto the floor, the pungent smell spreading through the carriage. Passengers noticed his strange behavior and began to panic. Some tried to stop him, but before they could act, Kim produced a lighter and ignited the gasoline. The flames erupted instantly, engulfing the floor and rapidly climbing the walls. The train car became a death trap as the fire spread with horrifying speed. Thick, black smoke filled the carriage, choking passengers and obscuring their vision. Screams of terror echoed through the enclosed space as people clawed at the windows and doors, desperate to escape. The fire consumed everything in its path, fueled by the accelerant Kim had brought. As the train came to a halt at Daegu's Junggangno Station, chaos spilled onto the platform. The flames leaped from the train to the station itself, creating a wall of fire that trapped hundreds of people. Panic erupted as passengers from other trains and bystanders on the platform tried to flee. The station's design, with its narrow corridors and limited exits, only amplified the tragedy. The disaster worsened when train 1080, approaching from the opposite direction, entered Junggangno Station. The operator, unaware of the inferno ahead, stopped the train. The flames quickly spread to train 1080, trapping its passengers as well. The confined space of the subway station turned into a furnace, with temperatures reaching unimaginable levels. Communication failures and confusion among subway operators and emergency responders compounded the disaster. Doors remained locked, trapping passengers inside the trains as the fire consumed everything. Many victims succumbed to smoke inhalation before the flames reached them, their final moments spent in terror and confusion. The intensity of the fire was such that it burned for nearly 2 hours before firefighters could bring it under control. By then, the damage was irreversible. The station was unrecognizable, charred and blackened, with the remains of victims scattered among the wreckage. As news of the disaster spread, Daegu was plunged into mourning. Families gathered outside hospitals and morgues, desperate for news of their loved ones. The scale of the tragedy was overwhelming: 192 dead, over 150 injured, and countless others traumatized. Many of the victims were so badly burned that identification took weeks, adding to the anguish of their families. The survivors were haunted by their experiences. Those who escaped the flames described scenes of unimaginable horror: people collapsing from smoke inhalation, others engulfed in flames, and the deafening screams of those who couldn't escape. The psychological scars left by the fire would linger for years, affecting not only the survivors but also the families of the victims and the city as a whole. Kim Dae-han was found soon after the fire. Severely burned, he had been taken to a hospital, where authorities quickly identified him as the perpetrator. Under police interrogation, Kim confessed to starting the fire, his demeanor chillingly detached. He expressed no remorse, describing his actions as a protest against society. In his twisted logic, the lives lost were collateral damage in his war against a world he believed had abandoned him. The confession shocked the nation. While Kim's mental illness was evident, the calculated nature of his crime left no doubt about his intent. He had meticulously planned the attack, knowing it would cause mass casualties. His confession revealed a man consumed by hatred, his mind warped by years of delusions and resentment. Kim's trial became a focal point for national grief and outrage. Prosecutors portrayed him as a man who had deliberately planned and executed one of South Korea's deadliest crimes. The defense argued that his schizophrenia had impaired his judgment, rendering him incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. Ultimately, the court sentenced Kim to life imprisonment, sparing him the death penalty due to his age and mental illness. For many, the sentence was inadequate, a small measure of justice for the lives lost. The victims' families were left to grapple with their grief, knowing that no punishment could ever compensate for their loss. The Daegu subway fire exposed significant flaws in South Korea's emergency response systems. Investigations revealed that the subway's fire suppression systems were inadequate and that communication failures had worsened the disaster. The tragedy prompted widespread reforms, including improved safety measures in public transportation and better training for emergency responders. Memorials were erected to honor the victims, their names etched in stone as a reminder of the lives lost. For the families of the deceased, however, the scars remain. The pain of losing loved ones in such a senseless and horrifying manner is a wound that time cannot heal. The story of Kim Dae-han and the Daegu subway fire is a chilling reminder of the destructive power of untreated mental illness and unchecked resentment. It is a tale of unimaginable loss, a tragedy that shook a nation to its core. For those who lived through it, the memories are a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the depths of human despair. As South Korea continues to move forward, the lessons of the Daegu subway fire remain relevant. It stands as a testament to the need for compassion, understanding, and vigilance in addressing the factors that can lead individuals to such dark paths. And it serves as a haunting reminder of the devastation that one person's actions can inflict on countless lives. The tragedy doesn't end with the courtroom or the memorials. The echoes of that fateful day resonate deeply in the lives of survivors, witnesses, and families, haunting them with questions that may never find answers. What could have been done differently? Could someone have intervened earlier in Kim Dae-han's life, perhaps offering him the help he so desperately needed? Could the disaster have been mitigated with better safety measures or faster responses? These questions continue to plague those affected, a chorus of what-ifs that refuse to be silenced. In the days following the disaster, the stories of those who perished began to emerge, painting a tapestry of loss that spanned generations. Entire families were wiped out in the fire, leaving no one to carry their names or memories. Parents lost children, Children lost parents, and siblings lost one another in a tragedy that did not discriminate. Among the victims were students, office workers, elderly retirees, and even tourists who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each story deepened the wound that the fire had inflicted on the nation. For the survivors, the scars were not only physical but deeply emotional. Many battled survivors' guilt, haunted by the knowledge that they had escaped while others had not. Some reported recurring nightmares, reliving the terror of that day in vivid, horrifying detail. Therapy and counseling became a lifeline for those who could afford it, but the journey to healing was slow and uneven. The Daegu subway fire became a watershed moment for South Korea, forcing the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about its infrastructure and societal attitudes toward mental health. Public outrage surged as investigations revealed the systemic failures that had contributed to the high death toll. The subway lacked proper fire suppression systems, and its emergency protocols were woefully outdated. The station's design, with limited exits and poor ventilation, exacerbated the disaster. In the face of public scrutiny, officials promised sweeping reforms, including the installation of state-of-the-art fire suppression systems, enhanced training for staff, and the implementation of stricter safety regulations across all public transportation systems. Beyond infrastructure, the tragedy sparked a national conversation about mental health. For decades, mental illness in South Korea had been a taboo subject, stigmatized and often ignored. Kim Dae-han's actions forced society to confront the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and the lack of support for those who suffer from it. Advocacy groups sprang up, demanding better access to mental health care and increased public awareness about the importance of early intervention. In the years that followed, memorials to the victims became sites of reflection and mourning. At the Junggangno station, a permanent installation was erected, featuring plaques bearing the names of the 192 lives lost. Families and survivors visit these memorials regularly, leaving flowers, notes, and personal mementos as tokens of love and remembrance. The tragedy is also commemorated annually, with ceremonies held to honor the victims and to remind the nation of the importance of vigilance and compassion. For many, these events serve as a way to channel their grief into something constructive, ensuring that the lessons of the Daegu subway fire are not forgotten. In prison, Kim Dae-han remained a symbol of the tragedy, his name forever linked to one of the darkest chapters in South Korea's history. Reports from his incarceration painted a picture of a man unrepentant, his mind still trapped in the delusions that had driven him to commit the unthinkable. His life sentence became a point of contention. Some believed he deserved the death penalty, while others argued that his mental illness rendered him incapable of fully understanding the consequences of his actions. Kim's story serves as a grim reminder of the human capacity for destruction when despair goes unchecked. His crime was not born of ideology or greed but of a deep, consuming rage against the world. It forces us to ask difficult questions about the societal systems that fail individuals like Kim and the innocent lives that pay the price for those failures. 2 decades later, the scars of the Daegu subway fire remain visible, both in the physical world and in the collective psyche of South Korea. The reforms it prompted have undoubtedly saved lives, but for those who lived through it, the memory of that day is a constant presence. Survivors and families have formed support groups, creating a network of shared understanding and solidarity. Through these communities, they find strength in one another, working together to honor the memories of their loved ones and to advocate for continued improvements in public safety and mental health care. For the city of Daegu, the subway fire is more than a tragedy. It is a part of its identity, a painful chapter that shaped its present and will continue to influence its future. It stands as a stark reminder of what can happen when warning signs are ignored, when systems fail, and when one person's pain is allowed to fester into something monstrous. The Daegu subway fire is a story of unimaginable loss, but it is also a story of resilience and the human capacity to rebuild in the face of tragedy. While the fire claimed 192 lives, it also spurred a nation to confront its shortcomings and to strive for a safer, more compassionate society. Kim Dae-han's act of destruction serves as a chilling cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can emerge when despair meets neglect. But the response to his crime, the reforms, the memorials, the national reckoning shows that even in the darkest moments, there is an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to honor those who were lost by building a better future. For the families of the victims, the pain will never fully fade, but their enduring love and their determination to remember ensure that the lessons of February 18, 2003, will never be forgotten. The flames that engulfed the Daegu subway station may have been extinguished, but their legacy continues to burn brightly, lighting the way toward a safer, more compassionate world.